All right, guys, happy Sunday. For the first time in a very, very long time, there's no football today, so I figured what better day to drop an episode about a team in the Indianapolis Colts that has absolutely nothing to do with the playoffs than on a non-playoff football Sunday. You know, it's kind of that time of the year for us as fans of this team where things are just a little bit slow, but make no mistake, right now this is the calm before the storm because we have the combine at the end of the month, and obviously we all love draft talk. Free agency in early March, both in terms of re-signs for us and acquiring new players, hopefully, right? We'll see how that goes. But we just got to get through these next few weeks in terms of actual interesting, kind of top of mind, immediate things that we need to talk about. But I figured a little weekly roundup, kind of not a bad way to touch on a bunch of things that perhaps don't call for an entire episode, but we can still talk about through the course of saying, hey, let's take 3 topics and expand them over the course of an entire episode. So, of course, we have the new defensive piece, or rather the new piece added to the defensive staff in Chris Hewitt. I'll give my thoughts on that. Spoiler alert, I like it. But, of course, there's more to talk about. There's a clip of Zaire talking to Peyton Manning at the Pro Bowl. It's making its rounds. Figured, why the hell not? We'll talk about that too. And finally, there's a guy that I saw that may be available for trade this offseason that isn't exactly someone that the league as a whole was looking as a potential option. I think he might fit really well with the Indianapolis Colts, so we're going to talk about that as well. But real quick, before we even talk about any of that, were any of you guys at the Royal Rumble at Lucas Oil Stadium? Now, of course, listen, this is a Colts show, okay? The show's time-stamped, so feel free to skip around as you please. But if I'm to personalize it just for a moment here, one of the things you guys might not know about me, in fact, you definitely would not know about me at all, is when I was younger, coming out of high school, I actually trained as a pro wrestler for probably, 2 years or something like that. Like, I was a really, really big fan of that stuff growing up. And to this day, I still kind of enjoy the stories and the business side of things in terms of how does the promotion work? How do you book matches? And I kind of more so now prefer hearing wrestlers talk about wrestling than I do actually watching the show, but it has such a place in my heart. And of course, I still am kind of in the loop with some of the stories that are going on. And I'm just going to have to say, the Royal Rumble was always my absolute favorite pay-per-view of them all. So I've kind of been keeping up with what was going on going into it and all the stars that were in that main event. John Cena, when he came out, this is my overarching point. That Colts You Can't See Me merch, I mean, I'll tell you what, that's pretty good stuff. I mean, not for anything, I haven't bought wrestling merch in a really long time, and I'm very, very picky when it comes to the material that my t-shirt is. But I don't know. I mean, I might have to think about that one because, not for anything, it was as good as it gets. Neither here nor there. No need to talk too much about pro wrestling, right? We're here to talk about the Indianapolis Colts. So, let's get into Chris Hewitt. Actually, I'm sorry to delay. You know how it is. I have to introduce myself. My name is Justin. This right here is the Riding the Bench Colts podcast. As always, I ask everyone watching and enjoying the show, go ahead, shoot it a like. It's going to help me get out to as many Colts fans as humanly possible. Of course, subscribe if you want to be a part of the journey. We're looking to get to 4,000 subscribers by the start of next season. We're not particularly close, but if you keep coming back and enjoying the content, or perhaps today's your first time and you're enjoying what it is that you're listening to, maybe that subscribe button might become your best friend on a day like today. Audio listeners, leave a 5-star review. Let the people know how much you enjoy the show. We keep growing that side of things. A really big goal this year is to grow the audio side, right? YouTube has the picture, but really the better way to listen, let's say in a long car drive, is in the on the audio side of things. So for me, I'm just looking and saying, hey, would be wonderful if more people on their drive to work were able to join the discussion that we've been having for so long about this team. Now, all of that aside, let's go back to Chris Hewitt, and I just want to give you a quick rundown of his resume. If you have not looked into it yet, this was a guy that was a player in the late 90s, very briefly for the New Orleans Saints, has been on Baltimore's staff since 2012. Okay? 2012. I hadn't even graduated high school yet at that point. Okay? That's a long time. Primarily working in the secondary. In fact, only working in the secondary. So from 2012 to 2019, defensive backs coach. 2020 to 2021, pass defense coordinator. 2022 to 2023, pass game coordinator and secondary coach. So he took on both roles. And then last year, did that again, but also as an assistant head coach. Now, I don't know entirely what that entails, but point being, he has consistently moved up their ranking in an organization that really prides itself on defensive play. Okay, pretty good, right? Because one of the things we really enjoyed about Wink Martindale as a defensive coordinator hire before we hired Lou Anarumo is that he had been part of a Ravens team for a really long period of time that has a very good culture, and one that often, before really Lamar Jackson, was rooted in the defensive side of the ball, and they have not lost those roots whatsoever. And you look at the transition now he's going to make from the Ravens to the Indianapolis Colts. Well, he's doing the same exact things for us that he was doing for them, right? He's about to be our secondary coach and our defensive pass game coordinator. Well, okay, that is a lateral move. So you do wonder why exactly it is that he would go from the Ravens, who are a team that was deep in the playoffs this year, and then go to the Colts with really the same exact position. Now, I don't know. It's hard to really know why. I'm not really making an implication by saying it, but it is something that I observed, and mostly because I'm personalizing that. Like, why would I do that? Like, listen, he went to college at Cincinnati, talking about Chris Hewitt. So maybe he has family and friends that are closer to the Indianapolis area than they would be if he was in Baltimore. Maybe the Colts just offered him more money. Maybe he saw more room for growth here long term for him in terms of his career trajectory. Again, don't know. But either way, this hire furthers the theme that the Colts seem committed to changing the way things are done over here on the defensive side of the ball. And in my opinion, seemingly with a newfound emphasis or respect for the importance that the secondary plays in the defense being a unit that other teams have to be scared of coming into a given week. Now, you look at Baltimore, right? This past season with him as the secondary coach. Bottom of the league in passing yards allowed. And I know a lot of people are going to look at that and say, well, okay, what the hell? We're trying to improve the passing defense, and we get the defensive coordinator from the Bengals, who overall didn't have a great season last year with that team. And then you look at the guy from Baltimore, and hell, they were 31st against the pass last year. Well, that stat doesn't tell the whole story. In fact, it tells the opposite of the true story. It's completely misleading. You look at the reality of the situation in Baltimore. This is a team that, despite being 31st against the pass, was top 10 in terms of yards per attempt allowed. I'm talking on the good side, right? Top 10 in completion percentage allowed against them. And additionally, they were top 3 in terms of pass attempts tried against their defense, which I believe was 625, and then couple that with bottom 3 in rushing attempts against them. So in other words, the stats show, and I'm not a huge stats guy, but it does tell a story to me, teams were throwing against the Ravens and not running against the Ravens. Well, okay, the Ravens were one of the highest scoring teams in all of the league last year, and they were the second highest scoring first half team. So the story here for the Ravens defense and their secondary, despite being 31st against the pass, hope you're following me here, is that teams largely put up numbers against this Ravens defense as a byproduct of them trying to keep up with the high-powered Ravens offense, not because the Ravens were truly poor against the pass as a defense. So hard to be upset with this hire in any capacity at all. In fact, in my opinion, the only reasonable opinion to have on this hire is that, hell, we like this hire of Chris Hewitt over here. And I'm really starting to like the way this team or the start that the Colts are off to on the defensive side of the ball from a coaching perspective. Like, you can tell that Lou Anarumo, in my opinion, you could tell Steichen led the way with that hire. Like, Lou, in terms of his philosophy and the way he approaches the game, and then really, as a consequence of that, the way he approaches play calling as a defensive coordinator is far closer to the way Steichen approaches an offense in terms of flexibility and creativity and trying to get the most out of the guys that you have, right? Now you bring in a guy like Chris Hewitt and say, okay, well, who did he coach with the Ravens? You're looking at a Marlon Humphrey, right? And he was a physical, lengthy corner, much like the guys that the Colts have right now in place. We know Juju Brents can't stay on the field, but Jalen Jones, another guy, really has those long arms, physical style of play. Not to say either of those guys are Marlon Humphrey, but at least they're built in the same mold as players, right? And then you look at Kyle Hamilton. What a football player he is for the Baltimore Ravens. He's a guy who can fly around, blitzes a lot, a great tackler, right? Well, Nick Cross can do all the same things, in theory, that a Kyle Hamilton can do. So it seems the way this defense right now is going to be approached has completely flipped from what we've seen, right? From under Gus Bradley, his approach on most levels at large. Of course, you can look and say, well, this game he blitzed a little bit, that game he did a little something different. But at large, Gus Bradley looked at this thing and said, okay, you as players have to adapt to my defensive philosophy and scheme. And from there, we can get the best out of our defense. Now for the Indianapolis Colts, it seems far more about how can we put the personnel that we have and the personnel that we bring in the best possible position to succeed and get the best out of our players by running our defense through them, not having them have to bend to our will. And I'll tell you something, at least on its face, we'll see what the results are when it's all said and done. I far prefer that approach by the Indianapolis Colts than what they were doing. So that's my thoughts on Chris Hewitt. And other news, Zaire Franklin. No real story here, but I will have to say, to be a fly on the wall in a conversation between him and Peyton Manning at the Pro Bowl after all the Colts went through this season, after all the criticism that Zaire Franklin has gotten by Colts fans at large. And you know Zaire Franklin is the type of guy that absolutely listens to that, okay? You do wonder, was it just small talk between him and Peyton Manning? Or was there some sort of questions asked about from Zaire Franklin about what this thing is supposed to be? I mean, not for anything. If you are an Indianapolis Colt right now, there is not a single person better than the sheriff to talk to in terms of, can we get some insights about how we turn this thing around? And I just wonder what it is that they were talking about. And hopefully Zaire took advantage of that conversation. Of course, you don't want to fanboy out, but at the same time, when you have an Indianapolis Colts legend right there in front of your face and you have his ear, at least one question about maybe a way to improve and kind of the vision for the locker room would be nice, because I still do maintain, despite the fact that many of us have turned on Zaire Franklin and seem to claim that he can't play, which I think is a little perhaps emotional because we're Colts fans. We're almost so deep in the trees we can't see the forest when it comes to a Zaire Franklin. I still maintain that guy can play football, and he can be a part of the solution here in Indianapolis if he checks his ego at the door. Whether or not he does it, we're going to have to see. But Zaire Franklin, as a guy, has made it here to where he is today the hard way. He's had nothing given to him whatsoever. He was not highly touted out of high school. He went to Syracuse. He was a 7th-round pick, and he's built himself up to be a perennial Pro Bowler. This year, a second-year All-Pro and a consistent league leader in tacklers. Now, whether or not you want to make a case as to how he's getting all of those tackles, at the end of the day, listen, the most tackles in the entire league, okay? You can't discredit that entirely. And I'm not ready to turn on Zaire Franklin just yet, even if at times that I have implied it. Just, again, really, that's all I have to say about that. No story there with him and Peyton Manning, but we talk about it regardless. Now, for the last part, I see a player right now out there that I heard may be available via trade, perhaps via free agency if he gets cut, that fits well into what the Colts are doing. The player's name is a guy you may have heard of once or twice before. Perhaps you even drafted him in fantasy and got burned for it. Mark Andrews. Reports out there right now that Mark Andrews may get traded or cut by the Ravens if they are unable to come to an agreement on a restructured contract, if they even want to go through all the effort to restructure the contract, right? Because right now, that's a team that has a younger guy in Isaiah Likely who started to show what he can bring to the table. But at the same time, you do look at Mark Andrews and say, one, this guy's been a perennial top-tier tight end in the league for a period of time, and two, he really came on strong as the season progressed. Like what looked like perhaps a job that was going to start tilting towards Isaiah Likely early in the season very quickly flipped back to Mark Andrews, and you can't help but look at that car accident he was in last offseason and say, okay, maybe it just took a little while for him to become kind of back to himself, because he was one of the more productive tight ends in the league in the second half of the season, and now he's set to become a free agent at the end of, not right now, right? Not the upcoming free agency period, but the end of next season. So sure, acquiring a guy like Mark Andrews, if you're the Indianapolis Colts, is going to eat up quite a bit of cap coming into this season. But you also look at the current core of weapons on this offense, and you say none of them need to be paid this offseason, right? We paid Michael Pittman Jr., we paid Jonathan Taylor, and then Alec Pierce not due till next year. Josh Downs, nowhere close, still on the rookie deal. Adonai Mitchell, nowhere close, still on the rookie deal. And then you couple that with the needs that this team needs in the secondary, while we're all here talking about a Tyler Warren at tight end from Penn State and drafting him, you wonder if they're looking at going heavy at the secondary in the draft. Now, we know Chris Ballard, historically speaking, has not been the best at drafting that position early, but with Lou Anarumo and Chris Hewitt in here, those two guys, obviously, they would call them experts, right, in the secondary. Those are two guys that hopefully can help at least mitigate those shortcomings of Chris Ballard a little bit. They can help in that scouting process in the secondary in more ways than maybe have been available for this team in years past. So you say, okay, one approach the Colts can take is say, hey, tight end, a very, very hard position to get right. Like last year, Brock Bowers, easy to look at that pick now and say, okay, the Colts definitely should have done that. But realistically, you look, the tight end position is not exactly one that is accustomed to coming into the league and getting real quick production out of. You guys like Sam Laporta recently, and again, Brock Bowers, as I said. But overall, far more often than not, does a tight end take quite a while to come into their own, as opposed to a guy in the secondary, a Quinyon Mitchell last year, right? Or even a Kyle Hamilton for the Ravens when he came in, a Brian Branch for Detroit. These types of guys could come in and really make an immediate impact for a team with more frequency than a tight end. So you do wonder, and you say, okay, one approach for the Colts can be, let's draft the secondary early, and then if a guy like Mark Andrews is available, let's go ahead and try to bring him on board. And now you say, okay, we've elevated the offense in terms of the weapons we have, and most certainly, in theory, we'll have elevated the defense as well, and still have a little bit room to kind of go around in free agency. But Mark Andrews is a guy that I think could be a really, really good fit for the Indianapolis Colts. A guy like Anthony Richardson, despite the fact we know he likes to operate within the pocket, is a bit of an improviser at quarterback at times. Mark Andrews very much used to the scramble drill, having played with Lamar Jackson. I think it's a natural fit, not for anything, and one that I would be worth paying for, or I think is worth paying for, particularly for one season. So we're going to see how this thing goes, but I thought an interesting observation, a name to watch potentially for the Indianapolis Colts this offseason, is a Mark Andrews. If you're the Ravens and you're saying, okay, not for anything, we don't want this contract on the books, how much could it possibly cost to go get him if the Ravens are kind of trying to get him out of there anyway, right? Think about when the Colts traded Stephon Gilmore. Sure, he was still a great player, but because of the situations at the time, the Colts said, okay, we'll take a fifth-round pick for that guy. Well, okay, not for anything. Mark Andrews or fifth-round pick, what would you rather have? What would you rather have? If you're asking me, Mark Andrews for next season, and it's not even close, okay? So I think that might be a good idea for the Indianapolis Colts if that story continues to progress how it started, which is that he might be available. But just figured I'd bring the idea up today. Perhaps it's one that gets talked about a little bit more as the offseason progresses. We'll see. But that right there was an episode. You made it to the end. Congratulations. Like, subscribe if you're on YouTube. If you're an audio listener, leave that 5-star review. But my name is Justin. This right here was the Behind the Bench Colts podcast. And as always, go Colts.